So, just want to say a few words on this massacre in Virginia Beach. Um, I was walking to the local bus station with a friend last night, and on my way back, it was the early hours of the morning. I was actually thinking about gun violence in America. No particular reason, it was just on my mind. Um, I go home, turn on the news, and there it is. Now, I'm not saying there's anything particularly unusual about that, but that is really just a testament to how common this is now. Um, and I was just depressed about it. I was just depressed seeing this. And I'm not even American. Um, I've touched on this subject in a few other videos. I've got strong views on the gun issue because it's something that I have given a lot of thought to. I've tried to put myself in the shoes of pro gun Americans and how they see things. I recently had a civil but forthright debate with a close friend of mine. She lives in Colorado, and she took me by surprise because she was more pro gun than I would have imagined. But she's very young. She's 21, smart young woman. Nothing to suggest that she was coming from a tunnel vision perspective, because she did say that there were aspects of it that she recognized was problematic, i.e., how frequently this sort of thing occurs. I mean, to put that in context, she's 21. Basically, there was recently the marking of Columbine, 20 years, and there's been significantly worse massacres since, but I think that's kind of seen as a beginning point of, or at least a turning point of debate perhaps about the subject. There were mass shootings before Columbine. There was, for example, I believe it was 1986 Edmond, Oklahoma shooting. There was a Killeen, Texas shooting of 1991. But it was particularly after Columbine in the last 2 decades that it really seems to have got out of control. And it doesn't necessarily correspond with the overall homicide of the United States. So if you look at, for example, the peak homicides in many American cities, they were actually higher in the past. But that's individual homicides. This situation of mass shootings seems to be a relatively recent phenomenon. I mean, I struggle to find many records of this many mass shootings in, for example, the 60s and 70s. The 60s had plenty of social turmoil. The only example I can think of is that University of Texas shooting, the guy that, I forget his name now, who, shot people off from the tower. But look at what's happened in the last 2 decades. Each tragedy, each massacre surpassed by another. Virginia Tech, the Aurora shooting, Sandy Hook, Orlando, Las Vegas, San Bernardino. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, which is actually the word used in Robert Kennedy's famous speech. Um, I am so grateful to live in a country where there is not this gun culture. And I've been in debates with Americans about this, and they say, oh, well, you Europeans, you Brits have the knife problem. But here's the thing, we do have a knife problem, and we recognize it. And there's debate about it, and there's debate about how we should deal with that. London has a knife problem, no one denies that. I think a fundamental aspect of the American gun issue is significant denial from the pro gun side that guns are part of the problem. This is a uniquely American thing. And yet, the problems that the gun lobby often cite as factors, you can find in other developed countries. So they say it's a mental health problem. Do they really think that there is no one in Canada or the UK or Australia or Japan that has mental health problems? course there are. This country has, in fact, in recent years, there's been a lot of debate about mental health in the UK. We have plenty of people suffering mental health problems. There's plenty of people who are lonely. There's plenty of people who feel bullied in school and work. So the sort of things that the gun lobby cite as problems can be found in every developed country, can be found everywhere. But this level of gun violence is a uniquely American problem among developed countries. Okay, you can cite Central American countries with higher homicide rates, but I'm talking about developed countries. It is unique. You simply do not have this situation in the UK, in France, in Japan, not with this sort of frequency, and even allowing for the population difference. So the gun lobby will say, oh, well, America's got a much bigger population. It does, but even allowing for that, you do the math, it is exceptionally more commonplace. Chris Como was discussing this on CNN last night, and I don't agree with everything he says generally, but I think he raised some very good points here. And he was saying this is now it's the routine thing. He was talking about the culture of violence. He wasn't actually talking so much about the gun issue, but he was talking about the culture of violence and intolerance whereby so many people in the United States seem to settle their differences through violence. And it made me think of something. You know, you have workplace disputes everywhere, right? But the big difference is this: if you have a situation whereby someone feels that they've been treated unfairly by their boss, which happens, or they're being bullied or they're being picked on, in America, because access to guns is so easy, um, they just go out, get their firearm, and commit the mass shooting. Now, one thing about this particular incident is that it kind of counters the narrative that, again, the gun lobby come out with. Oh, these things only happen in gun-free zones. Well, that's not true. In the state of Virginia, unless I'm mistaken, the only places where guns are prohibited is schools and police stations. This was, I don't know exactly what the facility was, but it wasn't a gun-free zone. And the guy responsible apparently had a legally purchased firearm, and he hadn't been fired. But it's a fact that he obviously had some grievance with his workplace. You know, I imagine in the coming days more will be revealed, but his response was to kill 12 of his colleagues. I don't know how many were injured. And this happens over and over and over again. There's a lot of focus on school shootings, as there should be, but there's also a lot of workplace shootings in America. So the argument it only happens in gun-free zones is simply wrong. I mean, you can make the point, if you wanted to look at it that way, the whole of the UK virtually is gun-free. The whole of Japan is gun-free in that sense. And this level of mass shootings simply doesn't happen. I'm not saying there's no gun violence, but put it this way, it is so rare that when it does happen, it is a big story. The last time we had a mass shooting in the UK was back in 2010, 9 years ago. The Cumbria shootings. That was in a rural area where there are the few guns in Britain. That is where they're likely to be because it's a rural area. Farmers have guns. In that case, it was a disgruntled taxi driver. But this, I just find it sinister that there's a new norm in America whereby active shooter, children now know what active shooter means. And I find it staggering that there's kind of an acceptance, not with all Americans. I think that's a mistake sometimes us outsiders make, that we think because it's a big problem in the States that all Americans are okay with it. Not at all. There's many Americans who really do see that there's a problem here and they're trying to do something about it. Politically speaking, I think the Democrats are way ahead because they recognize that there's a problem and something needs to be done about it. The Republicans, generally speaking, when these things happen, it's thoughts and prayers, and then it's, well, let's just pretend it never happened. And I'm not dismissing thoughts and prayers. I know, religion's a big thing in the States. I'm not insulting that, but surely something has to change. What I find hard to fathom is how this can happen so frequently. I mean, Wikipedia now has lists of mass shootings per year in the United States, the same as their list of terrorist attacks around the world. A mass shooting is defined as a shooting incident in which there's more than one victim that could be killed or wounded. This year alone, it's like 12 killed in Virginia Beach, seven killed elsewhere, five killed elsewhere, five killed elsewhere, three killed somewhere else. It just, and it's very plausible that this incident will be surpassed later this year. That's very plausible with the way things have been going in recent years. Orlando was horrendous, and then that was surpassed by the Las Vegas shooting the year afterwards. So I just find it hard to understand why pro gun Americans seem to think that guns are not part of the issue here. And I find it pretty appalling how the gun lobby scare people. They say that any talk about gun control, any talk about common sense regulation is gun grabbing, is taking away guns, is, violating the Second Amendment. Um, I think even if the Democrats wanted like to ban guns, it wouldn't be possible. So that is just one of the tactics the gun lobby use to scare people. It just wouldn't be possible. Even if they tried to do it, I mean, a country awash with guns, they couldn't do it anyway. So to me, that's pure paranoia on the part of the gun lobby. I cannot think of a single example where a law abiding citizen who wasn't posing a threat had their firearms taken away. Not one. Not one. I haven't seen gun advocates provide an example of that once. And yet they're always saying, oh, gun control's scary. It's about take. Nowhere else in the world, or at least in no other developed country, is such paranoia around the idea of gun control. And what I find, as much as I love the United States, I find it incredible that the issue of gun ownership and freedom are so closely tied. If this is about the founding principles of America, the Second Amendment was written in the 1780s, shortly after the country had been in a war of independence with my country. But that was about a well regulated militia. Not every man, woman, and child can own an AK 47, because if you look at the extremes that the gun lobby propose, they do believe there should be no limits. They do believe that people, and in some states this is the case, can just walk into coffee shops with loaded firearms. This is insanity. I mean, even putting aside the fact you don't know who is a good guy with the gun and who is a potential mass shooter, accidents can happen. Someone could trip up and then their gun goes off. There's an increasing number of reports of children getting injured because some reckless parent has left a firearm lying around. It's just a situation I find very hard to fathom. And just for the record, I'm not naive. I understand that in the United States is a huge country. In rural Midwestern states, where, for example, particularly there may be wild animals, where there is a hunting culture, frontier states, I understand the gun culture completely. I think it would be naive to expect those areas to be gun free, and I've no problem with people, wanting a gun for self protection, for protecting the family, particularly in rougher areas. What I cannot fathom is why anyone would feel the need to bring a loaded firearm into a public cafeteria, a restaurant, a cinema, movie theatre. That is something I cannot comprehend. I mean, to me, that is an incredibly paranoid person. I mean, what sort of mindset must someone have to feel that they need to carry a loaded firearm around? What, to express their freedom? It's crazy. It's absolutely hard to comprehend. So this is yet another tragedy. I very much doubt anything's going to change from this. I think the things Chris Cuomo was saying was very valid. Even saying those things, he was getting hateful tweets, probably from Trump supporters. For what? He wasn't even calling for gun control. He barely even mentioned guns. And yet, simply for saying there needs to be a dialogue about the culture of violence, he was getting hate. So when people are that entrenched in their attitude to guns, I I don't really see where this can go. And it has definitely been getting worse in recent decades. I think if you look at the past, this is a particularly recent phenomenon. And I think part of it is Republican presidents and Republican administrations rolling back on gun legislation. In the 1990s, with the exception of Columbine, there were fewer mass shootings because the Clinton administration brought in common sense measures. Um, I just, my goodness, it depresses me, and I'm not even in the States. I love America, but I don't think I'll ever understand this. I don't think I'll ever understand how a country that deals with this so often can constantly take the same attitude. And to those Americans who know there's a problem and they're trying to do something about it, there's groups like Nurses Against Gun Violence. These are people that see the effects firsthand. They're the ones that have to patch up afterwards, not the NRA, not Republican politicians who are making it as easy as possible for dangerous people to get their hands on firearms. I mean, what's the go-to argument? Oh, they're going to get it anyway. There's always going to be bad guys with guns. Yeah, but that doesn't mean you should make it easier for them. And I accept that not every case is exactly the same. So this guy, for instance, in Virginia Beach, had legally purchased his firearms, but there will be something there that surely needs to be examined. For example, why why should a public building why should it be okay to bring a loaded firearm into a public building? Maybe Virginia needs to seriously look at making more places gun free. You know, the myth that it's only gun free zones where this happens is just that, a myth. I don't know. I really don't know. Um